Welcome into another Transfer Spotlight. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Jason Staples, part of Inside Carolina's feature stories on all North Carolina's new transfer guys enrolled earlier this year in January, except for the Australian punter. He will be there later. But North Carolina has sort of loaded up in the transfer portal, and one that Jason Staples is very familiar with, Amari Gainer out of Florida State, a 5-year veteran at Florida State, started in 2018 and has 1 year of eligibility at the jack position for Gene Chizik in the North Carolina defense. Jason, tell us what you got. He seems to be maybe prototypical for the jack position, but your overall thoughts?
Yeah, he's not quite prototypical for the jack because you'd like him to have just a little bit more weight to him for that. If he gained another 10 or 15 pounds, then he'd be prototypical. I mean, if he was just a little bit heavier, and that's got to be something that they're going to be looking at in the offseason. Can you get him from I think he's coming in at about 230. If you get him from 230 to 240, and he's played, by the way, as high as 235 at Florida State. I think the highest he got down there was 237. But I think he's in the 230, 232 range right now, somewhere in there. A little bit more weight would be prototypical, but otherwise, he really does bring a lot to the table that they want at that jack position. He's a guy that, uh, when you put him in a designated pass rush role, has a ton of burst. He is an explosive athlete, and he can run. And then he brings a lot of physicality to the position, uh, and he's never really going to be a bull rusher, but he's physical still at that weight. And so you want that, you want all of those things, and then you want somebody who can drop and play some pass coverage once in a while to give you some flexibility in terms of not being predictable in your defensive calls. And he's played as an off-ball linebacker. I mean, in 2019, he played mostly Sam linebacker, which is a coverage role most of the time. So yeah, he had a lot of coverage snaps that year and did pretty well there. I mean, back in 2019, you could make the case that he was Florida State's most consistent, maybe best defensive player in 2019. That was as a redshirt freshman. And really his usage has gone down each year. 2020 and 2021 were basically about the same number of snaps, but he had a lot fewer snaps this year. He got hurt in game one and just never really found his way back on the field after that. They've significantly upgraded their talent level down there, and just in terms of his fit in their defense, he didn't have a natural spot because they've moved more to two true ends in a four-man type front most of the time. So he just didn't have a natural fit in that system, which is why he decided to move on for his final year to try to audition for more of a edge type, designated pass rush type role for the NFL if he can do it.
Yeah, and we've talked about before on these shows and on the thing is why guys transfer P5 to P5. And this is a Florida State guy. This is a Florida State guy through and through. Tallahassee native. Dad played at Florida State. I mean, he is as Florida State as it gets. And yet he's up at North Carolina. Just sort of briefly explain to folks, and you sort of went there at the end. Guys don't transfer because they're not any good. They transfer for opportunities. And like you said, this is a great opportunity for him to help North Carolina's defense in a big way because Carolina needs edge rushers. Good gracious, they need edge rushers. But also to your point, audition what he can do and maybe put some more tape out there for the next level.
Yeah. So thinking about this from his perspective, this is a guy that has never put up an overall Pro Football Focus score below 70. He's a good player, and he was a good player at Florida State multiple years. His Pro Football Focus grade in 2022 is an 82.5. I mean, can't remember what the top on Carolina's defense was last year, but that's toward the top. But the issue for him was, again, more fit. Uh, he'd kind of bounced around a lot of positions down there. They've been through 3 coordinators on the defensive side since he arrived at Florida State, and each case he was moved to a slightly different spot, a different role, because they needed him on the field. He was one of the best athletes on the team, and they needed him on the field, but he was never really asked to do what he was most natural at doing. I mean, when I evaluated him coming out of high school, I evaluated him as put another 10 pounds on him and, make him a designated pass rusher most of the time. And there's your natural role. And he never actually got to play that role at Florida State just because of what the other personnel was. When he first got there, they were running a different odd front defense, and they wound up putting him at what they called the star position, which is more along the lines of what you see with the kind of nickel kind of position that North Carolina plays now. So I mean, he was playing that role, and they would bring him off the edge on third down from that role some, but he did a lot of pass coverage type stuff. And then when they changed coordinators, he moved to the inside, and then was asked to do a lot of things on the inside just because they didn't have any other linebackers. They whiffed on a bunch of their targets in recruiting and were short on linebacker talent. It's like, well, got to find a way to get this guy on the field, so let's put him there. And he was kind of a fish out of water there. He's not a guy that you ask to do a lot of read steps and make sure that he's checking this gap versus this gap. And he struggled a little bit there. You could see at times he was just a step or two slow to diagnose, and then he'd wind up having to use that athleticism to chase a guy down, who he should have been able to get at a better angle if he'd have been able to diagnose a little quicker. And so that then led to, once they got more natural linebackers, he moved down the depth chart at that role. So then this year they tried to, okay, well, let's get you working with more of the edge guys, but then he got hurt and they had other edge guys that were successful. So it didn't pan out for him down there. But it was never a matter of him not being a good player. He was always a good player. He was always a guy that they tried to find ways to get on the field because, he's one of your best 11. But ultimately, there just wasn't a good fit for him in Tallahassee. Whereas I think the moment he stepped on campus at North Carolina, he's one of the best defensive players on the North Carolina team. He's a guy that can upgrade what North Carolina has to offer on the edge and be, like you said, close to a prototype for what they want in the Jack. He's a guy that, you look at, let's just go back to the 2019 NC State game, right? Which was a solid game for him. 2019, this is as a redshirt freshman playing underweight. He had 2 sacks, 4 tackles, and a forced fumble, and then gave up a 56.3 NFL passer rating when targeted on 4 targets. That's pretty solid day of work against a team that obviously North Carolina wants to play well against. So, that's what he brings to the table. You're going to see someone. I think Noah Taylor's a pretty good comp for him in a lot of ways. I mean, I think he's similar size. I think he's burstier and more explosive than Taylor was, but maybe not quite as long. But he's a more explosive athlete and is a faster overall player than Taylor was. And he brings a lot of the same kind of intangibles. He was one of the hardest workers down in Tallahassee, and was a guy that had the respect of everybody in that locker room, and was one of those team leaders that really helped transition that culture from a bad culture to a winning culture the last few years. And he understands the work. He understands how to do all of that. And the other thing is that he brings a physicality and a nastiness to the position. You look at some of the shots that he put on quarterbacks when he was there, and even on running backs as ball carriers. He's a headhunter. Even when headhunting is kind of not allowed these days, he's a guy that, he's an old school player in that regard who likes to play football and likes to be physical and likes contact. And, Carolina has desperately needed all of those factors on the defensive side. And I think he's a natural fit to slide right in and be an immediate starter at the jack position who, provides some versatility and some pressure on the quarterback from day one.
And it frees Kamen Rucker up to do what he does and have some help at that position, because Rucker's a little bit undersized, Gainer coming in at 6'3", you said 230-ish or so. Maybe they'll get him a little bit heavier. Um, but where you went there at the end of your conversation, talking about the comparison with Noah Taylor and then the nastiness he plays with. I mean, he's gotten the leadership award, Bobby Bowden Leadership Award, while at Florida State. Um, as far as what Noah Taylor was able to do leadership wise for this team, how does Gainer come in and handle that, given everything you've already talked about?
I think it's going to be pretty natural and pretty easy for him. I mean, he's a guy that once you get to talk to him, you'll see immediately he's a magnetic guy, and he's a smart guy, and he does that without being aloof or being a guy that's going to come in and just not fit with the other players on the team. He's going to come in and set an example by the kind of work he does, and will earn that respect immediately, and then just hold other guys accountable as that happens. He's going to be a natural player. He's a natural born leader and understands how to do that. And he starts with the work. Again, this is a guy that was a legacy down at Florida State. He learned how to work from his dad. And I'm a firm believer that guys who grew up with dads or who were top players and really hard workers themselves and played at the NFL or high level college level, those guys, those kids that grow up under those dads typically grow up embracing the work. And that's basically what he's done. And I think starting to lead from example, and then as that develops out, working, becoming more of a vocal leader. There will be some vocal aspects to him on this, but he'll start from the work, and he'll be a guy that will, I think, just be a natural fit in that locker room.
Amari Gainer, Florida State, comes to North Carolina to man the jack position. Anything left, Jason, on his play? I know you're intimately familiar with Florida State. I just think folks need to understand for sure that he comes to North Carolina for fit purposes and not at Florida State anymore. Certainly, Mike Norvell seems to have it rolling down in Florida State. And to North Carolina's benefit, they get a guy like Gainer coming in that fits into the plan at North Carolina a little better than maybe it did at Florida State. Anything else, Jason?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Let me ask you the question I've asked in every upgrade or no?
well, upgrade over what North Carolina had at the end of the year for sure. I think when you compare him player for player with Noah Taylor, who played the first 8 games, I think he's probably a wash. I think you're getting essentially a comparable player to Noah Taylor. So to put it in perspective, last year, North Carolina's Pro Football Focus grades on defense, the top graded guy was Kamen Rucker at 84.1, then Cedric Gray at 82.2, then Noah Taylor at 76.6. Okay. Amari Gainer last year, now more limited in terms of overall reps on the year, 82.5. So that would put him at number 2 in terms of graded players for North Carolina. Now, if we want to go to, say, 2019, where he was playing a role that's a little closer to what he'll be playing in terms of, well, they did play him in a comparable role last year when he was on the field for limited reps, but more extended play where he had 636 snaps in 2019. He was a 76.0 as a redshirt freshman, which is right in line with Noah Taylor's 76.6.
Yep.
So I think basically comparable to Noah Taylor in terms of the level of play you can expect. Maybe a little bit more upside than what Taylor had because of I think he's a more explosive overall athlete than Taylor. So maybe a little more upside, but I think that's basically what you're looking at is someone very similar to Noah Taylor. And the drop off from Taylor last year was pretty significant. So I think that makes him a significant upgrade over what we saw from Carolina over the last 6 games of the season.
That's Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. This has been Inside Carolina Transfer Spotlight. Jack. Amari Gainer from Florida State. 1 year left, 5-year veteran. He's played a ton of football, brings a ton of experience to North Carolina. We'll be back tomorrow with the last transfer spotlight. Another A, Antavius Lane. Thanks, Jason.